Good morning, Windsong. If you have your Bible, let's open to Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8. And as you turn there, imagine that a toy company came to you and said, hey, we're going to make an action figure about you. We're going to take you and we're going to turn you into an action figure. And you know every action figure has a little button on it that if you push it, will say some phrases. So think, what would your action figure say? Maybe you should ask the person next to you, and they could probably help you figure out what your action figure would say. I asked people about a month ago as I was starting to think about this lesson, what would my action figure say if they made an action figure about me? And one person, a member here, said, oh, you know what it would say? It would say, let's read this in context. I thought that's true. Another person here, another member here said, yours would just say Yahweh. That's what it would say. I asked my kids, dangerous thing. I said, what would an action figure say of me? And they quickly said, Noah did, wash your hands and look at me when I'm talking to you. Here's our question. If they were to make an action figure of Jesus from Mark 6, 7, and 8. This is the Mark 6, 7, and 8 version of Jesus action figure. What would Jesus say? I put it up on the screen for you. Do you understand yet? I think that's what he would say. This comes from Mark 8, verse 21. Jesus said to them, that's the apostles, do you not yet understand? It's not the first time he's asked that question, and it won't be the last. But if you go back from chapter 6 and look at 6, 7, and 8, you're going to see an enormous amount of time that Jesus looks at his apostles and says, do you get it yet? Do you understand? Why is it that people don't understand? It could be because what is being told to them is complicated, it's confusing, it doesn't make any sense. But I would say what Jesus has been teaching them, it's not complicated. It's not confusing. He's not told it to them in riddles. And when he gave them a parable, he then in private explained to them in more detail. He's told them multiple times about things, and yet he still looks at them and says, do you not understand? So if it's not complicated and it's not confusing, well then maybe they're just not listening. Jesus is challenging those here in the text and you and I today with the challenge to listen. Listen. And that's our question. What he says in Mark 8:21 is the question for us this morning that I want to challenge you with this morning. Are you listening? Do you hear what Jesus is saying? Or are they just words on a page? Do you hear them as if they're spoken to you and not just words from a long time ago? Are you listening? Let's back up a chapter. Let's go back to Mark 7. And let's start reading in verse 32. And they brought to Jesus a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment. And they begged him to lay his hand on him. Jesus is brought a man who has two major problems. This man can't hear, and this man can't speak. Now, he can't totally not speak. He has a speech impediment. It's very difficult for him to speak. It's hard for him to communicate. And this man is brought to Jesus because they believe Jesus can do something about it. But I want you to imagine this morning the life of a person who cannot hear and cannot speak. How could you be a Christian today if you could not hear and could not speak? Well, you could do it very well, actually. In fact, many people do. Though you could not hear, you could have someone sign language the sermon to you. You could be a part of that ministry. You could even, if you could not hear, you could still read the text. You could communicate through means today that we have invented. But what if you couldn't speak? How would you proclaim the gospel? How could you be someone who fulfills the Great Commission to tell everybody about Jesus if you couldn't speak well? Well, once again, you could be a part of that sign language ministry. More than that, you could write, you could type. There would be ways and avenues for you to be a faithful Christian today if you couldn't hear and if you couldn't speak. But fast or rewind 2,000 years. Well, how would it have been like in the first century? This person who could not hear the Sermon on the Mount. There was no sign language ministries. He could not hear the teachings of Jesus, and he was unable to speak well, so he couldn't ask questions well. Life would have been radically different back then. Well, let's read what happens. Mark 7, verse 33. And taking him aside from the crowd privately, Jesus put his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, touched his tongue. Looking up to heaven, he sighed, and he said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. And Jesus charged them to tell no one, but the more he charged them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. It's a strange miracle, isn't it? Jesus has a man who cannot hear and he cannot speak. And Jesus then takes his fingers, puts them into his ear, takes spit from his own mouth, places it on him. Notice there is touch and there's taking something from him and giving it to them. And suddenly, this man can hear and he can speak. And now he won't stop proclaiming the gospel. Let me ask you this question. Who is this man? I skipped verse 31 on purpose. Let's go back to verse 31 for a moment and look at who this man is. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. This is really important. I put a map up here for us to see because this is important for us. So Jesus spends most of his time in that shaded Galilee area in the middle. That's where most of Mark has happened. But then remember, last week, he left to get away and he went over here to this Syro-Phoenician area, this Gentile area, and he met a woman who just wanted a crumb. Remember her? So he left the Jewish region and he walked over here to the Gentile region. And he met a woman who had unstoppable faith. So not only is Jesus again in a Gentile area, but he met someone with unstoppable faith. He then walks back through Galilee, where he has spent most of his time. And what were they doing the last time he was there? Look at chapter 7, verse 5. The Pharisees and the scribes asked him, Why do your disciples not walk according to the traditions of the elders, but eat with defiled hands? You see that? Last time he was there, they're arguing with him. They're questioning his faith. They're questioning his standing. He leaves. He goes over here to a Gentile area, meets amazing faith. He walks back through the area. What's going on? Well, they're still arguing. He comes back over here to another Gentile area, the Decapolis, on the bottom right of that map. That's 10 cities, Gentile cities. And who's he meet here? A man who can't hear, can't speak, but Jesus encounters him. And he won't stop proclaiming the message. Do you see what Mark is doing? You have a mother from Sidon with unstoppable faith. You have a man from the Decapolis who will not stop proclaiming. Hear this, church. This is really important. While the religious leaders are arguing about Jesus, the Gentiles are fulfilling the mission of God. You see that? What's going on in the middle? Well, we're arguing. Let me go over here. Wow, great faith. I passed back through. They're still arguing. I'm over here. More faith. While the Jews argue, the Gentiles are fulfilling the mission of God. Here's our key point, church. Sometimes the most familiar understand the least. That's the sad reality. This story of the man who can't hear and can't speak well is a living parable that represents the religious leaders. The religious leaders don't hear Jesus. They're deaf to him. They don't hear what he's saying. They don't hear what he's teaching. Their hearts are hard and their ears are closed. Remember back in Mark 4, he said, if you have ears to hear, hear. Well, they don't have ears to hear. They're deaf to him. We then see that they also don't speak well about him. They've tried to slander him and blaspheme him and accuse him of things that he never committed. So they don't hear and they don't speak. This man is a living parable. And the lesson is sometimes the most familiar understand the least. And why is that? These Jews were standing on 1,000 years of God's work. They were standing on a kingdom that knew God's power. They were standing on prophets and prophecies. They had the teaching. They had weekly worship in the synagogue. They had the festivals. Why do they not hear? Because sadly, sometimes the most familiar understand the least. But it doesn't just represent the religious leaders. This living parable also represents the apostles who don't hear well and don't speak well. Look at chapter 6, verse 52. If we back up to that, chapter 6, verse 52, the apostles did not understand about the loaves because their hearts were hardened. Chapter 7, verse 18, Jesus said to the apostles and the crowd there, "Are you also without understanding?" You see, that is why the question that Jesus keeps asking in Mark 6 and 7 and 8 is, do you understand yet? Do you hear? Or are you deaf? Shouldn't someone close to and familiar with Jesus be the most on fire for Jesus? I see some heads going like this. I mean, that's the way it should be. If you really know him, and you heard him, and you spent time with him, I mean, there should be no putting your fire out. You should be more on fire than anybody else. Yet that's not the case here. That's not the case with the religious leaders. It's not the case with the apostles who are spending day and night with Jesus. And what is happening here? Well, I want to propose to you this morning that what happens is faith can grow stale and ears can close and you can become spiritually deaf and stop listening. And if it happened to the apostles, it can happen to us. Spiritual deafness is a real problem. It's a problem that God knew was going to happen, and He prophesied about it. I'll put it up on the screen. I put 3 passages on the screen for you. Back in Zechariah 7, 11 through 12. But they refused to pay attention, talking about Israel, the people of God. They put their fingers in the ears to keep them from hearing. You see the connection to the parable? The living parable? Jesus puts His fingers in His ears. God said they put their fingers in the ears to keep from hearing. They made their hearts as hard as flint and would not listen to the law or to the words that Yahweh Almighty had sent by His Spirit through the former prophets. So great wrath came. Or how about Ezekiel chapter 12, verse 2? Son of man, you're living among a rebellious people. They have eyes to see, but they do not see, and ears to hear, but they do not hear, for they are a rebellious house. Let me give you one more. Jeremiah 5:21. Hear this, O foolish and senseless people, who have eyes but see not, but who have ears but hear not. God had talked about this. God had prophesied about this. God had said, my people have a tendency to go spiritually deaf, for their faith to grow stale. Sometimes the most familiar understand the least. In this room are people who have been Christians for longer than I've been alive. Some of you have a lifetime of faith. Your earliest memories were being inside an auditorium worshiping God. Some of you have faith that's been passed down from generation to generation, and you can trace it back multiple hundreds of years to faith in your family. You are familiar, but do you understand? Or has faith grown stale? Have we grown stale when it comes to sacrifice? What we give up for the mission of God, to get out of our comfort zones. Have we grown stale in that and complacent? Have we grown stale in priority, where the most important thing in our life is our relationship with Jesus? Has that been dislodged? Has that grown stale? Have we grown stale in repentance? When is the last time you had a heart-to-heart with God and said, here's my sins, I've been struggling? Have you grown stale in amazement? When is the last time you read John 3:16 and you stood in awe? For God so loved the world. How amazing is that? That God loved the unlovable and sent His only Son. We know that verse. We memorize it. It's probably the first Bible verse we memorize as kids. But are you still amazed by it, or is that just John 3:16? Or what about Ephesians 2:8, 9, and 10? How we're saved by grace through faith. Does that still amaze you? Or what if I tell you, turn to Acts 2:38? Do you say, oh, I know that one. I've heard that one my whole life. Has it grown stale? What happens if you grow up in a 10,000 square foot house and that's all you ever know? Well, you get used to it. You take it for granted. You take the space and the luxury and the benefits and everything that goes along with that for granted because it's all you've known. But then someone who's been living in a 400 square foot studio apartment suddenly gets a 10,000 square foot house and they're calling their friends. Look at what I got. Look, my entire apartment can now fit in my refrigerator. I got a pool. I got a TV the size of a movie theater. The Gentiles, for them, the blessings are fresh. For the Jews, that's all they've known. And the Gentiles are being welcomed into the kingdom. And they're amazed. And they can't stop proclaiming. Let me show you an example of this. Chapter 8, verse 1. In those days when, again, a great crowd had gathered and they had nothing to eat, He called His disciples to Him and He said to them, I have compassion on the crowd because they've been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away. And His disciples answered Him, how can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? Now, this is not the feeding of the 5,000. I didn't back up too far. We've already seen that. But we have a very similar situation where there's not 5,000, there's 4,000, and they don't have bread. And Jesus says, I have compassion on them. We got to do something. And the apostles say, well, I don't know what we're going to do. If I gave you a guess, what would you guess? Jesus solved the problem. But they don't hear that. Why is Jesus repeating the miracle? Why 4,000 now, 5,000 before? Why are we seeing it again? Well, who's the crowd? This is a Gentile crowd. The feeding of the 5,000 was a Jewish crowd. We're now in a Gentile area, and it's a Gentile crowd. And I wonder if the apostles are thinking, the kingdom is for us. The miracles are for us. I don't know how we're going to feed the Gentiles. Here we have a group of apostles who are facing a problem they faced just recently, saw the solution just recently. They now face the problem again, and they throw up their hands as if they don't know what to do or where to turn. And yet, between the miracles, we met a woman who just wants a crumb. We met a Gentile man who hears and proclaims. Oh, and what are the Jews doing? Look at verse 11. While all of this is going on, the Pharisees came and began to argue with him. What are you doing? Do you have faith that says, just give me a crumb? Do you have ears that hear and a mouth that wants to proclaim? Or are you sitting around arguing? It all comes to a head in chapter 8, verse 14. Now they had forgotten to bring bread. They only had one loaf with them in the boat. And Jesus cautioned them, saying, watch out, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said 7. And he said to them, verse 21, do you not yet understand? If this wasn't real and this wasn't a real struggle for us, it would be comical. Jesus has provided 2 miracles where he's given bread to those who are hungry who didn't have bread, and then the apostles find themselves on a boat with only one loaf looking around. We forgot our dinner. What are we going to do? And Jesus says, I want you to be careful of the leaven of the Pharisees. Because they're not listening or they're not paying attention, they're not getting it yet, they think he's talking about like the type of bread they eat. But what Jesus is really talking about is the leaven of a hard heart, the leaven of not listening. He says, watch out for those who act religious but are missing it. And then he rapid fire shoots question after question at them. Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you not see? Do you not hear? Do you not remember? Those are written down for you and me. Those are our questions this morning. That's what you should be reflecting on and asking yourself, do I get it? Because if it can happen to the apostles, it can happen to us. I don't want to be spiritually deaf when it comes to my faith. I don't want to only hear the things I like to hear and ignore everything else. I don't want to hear Jesus say what I like. I don't want to hear just the easy things. I want to hear Jesus fully. And I also don't want to be spiritually mute when it comes to my faith. I don't want to be silent about my faith. I want to proclaim my faith because I'm excited about my faith. And when we're excited about something, we proclaim it. But here's the good news. Jesus keeps offering us that bread. Sometimes the most familiar understand the least because their faith has grown stale. And I don't know why that is, but there's a number of reasons. It could be one of these on the board. Maybe it's a noise overload. You hear too much in this life. And there's too many voices speaking to you, and you can't listen to them all. So you've tuned everything out, and you just listen to yourself. Or maybe it's familiarity. You've just lost interest. You've gone through this exercise of show up and worship and go home for decades, and it's grown stale. Or maybe it's selective listening. Maybe it's spiritual apathy because you know you have sin in your life and you're not really doing anything about it. You've given up doing anything about it. Or maybe it's busyness, or maybe it's a hard heart, or maybe it's a lack of faith. But whatever the reason is, the result is a stale faith. But the God who can raise the dead can make faith fresh again. This morning, Jesus is calling you to respond. Maybe that looks like coming forward, but also He's calling each of us to respond in our hearts. To say, Lord, take that heart that has been hard, take those ears that have been turned off, turn them back on and freshen my heart and give me fresh faith again. Let me see the joy of my salvation once more. Or maybe you are the one who is sitting here saying, I want to be a part of following this Jesus. And maybe you need to be baptized. If that's you, baptism is available. If you need prayers, we're going to have a shepherd pray this morning. Or if you need to respond after, I'm always available. But don't leave with a stale faith. Let's stand. Let's sing.